Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me for part 2 of this very special interview with English exam expert Frank Carrizo. Now I should say that that's not Frank's official job title, that's just a title that I gave him, but I think if you have watched part 1 of the interview and when you watch part 2, you'll agree that he really is an English exam expert. And he also has a very useful podcast. So I really encourage you to check that out. I'll put the link in the description. It's really beneficial to anyone who's studying for an English exam. So if you haven't seen part 1, I encourage you to check that out. Frank gives lots of useful insights and tips on how to pass the exams. You can watch it before this one or afterwards. It doesn't really need to be in any order. If you like it, hit the like button, smash the subscribe button, or just click on them in a normal way. And enjoy the interview. Well, one is, what are the best strategies to pass the speaking part? And the other is, what are the most common mistakes students make at writing and speaking? They can watch my video for strategies, but if you have any
definitely,
tips or insights, but obviously you have a different perspective. Yeah, the most common mistakes.
Okay. I would say that strategies, doing a preparation course is always helpful. Find a language school, for example, near where you live, where you know that they have access to official materials, and as anything you would buy, you check that they have good references and they have good teachers, and but doing preparation guided by a teacher who knows how to prepare students, that's essential. Because you can do it on your own, but it would require a lot of observation from your part. I'm not saying that you can't. Of course people can, but they would have to take into consideration, for example, looking at a lot of sample videos of, in the official channels, you have a lot of speaking videos. And there are a lot of people giving advice. Making notes of those pieces of advice is always helpful. Also, it's a good idea to notice the type of grammar, the type of vocabulary that is required for every task, because even though the assessment scales that examiners use to evaluate a student in the speaking, I'm talking about the speaking, not everything fits perfectly in every section. So in part 1, you are supposed to do something. In part 2, you're supposed to do something. In part 3 and part 4, and so on. So noticing, for example, what kind of structures people tend to use more in which part, the kind of interaction that is needed in each part, for example, is very good. I mean, if as a student you can make notes of, make a list of structures and even using, like watching videos, and you can write down your own expressions, like, oh, that was a good one. I'm gonna see if I can use it the next time I practice. Because, for example, in the picture, the long turn, the one in which you have to describe, compare and contrast. Of course, the type of grammar would require contrasting structures, comparing structures, and that will give you an opportunity to showcase a very specific part of English. So that's why
speculative vocabulary too.
Exactly.
About what they're seeing.
Exactly. So, and the type of interaction needed, the type of discourse needed, making a list of, in part 1 I need to focus on this, in part 2 I need to focus on this, part 3 and part 4. So making a list of possible structures, the same way I tell my students, for example, in writing, knowing the genre you have to write about is number 1. And I think for writing, I know the question was also about writing. It's also good, for example, to understand what is expected of you in every type of writing, in every genre. And I think one of the main problems that students usually have is misunderstanding what they have to do, what they're supposed to do in a piece of writing. For example, the difference between a proposal and a report, for example, they look pretty much the same because the layout looks pretty similar. You have headings, you have paragraphs, and you may have recommendations or not, but they're not the same, and the focus of the task is not the same either. I've in classes, for example, I've told students, well, this is a very nice piece of writing. I mean, in terms of language, it's fine, but you're losing the focus. I mean, I think that's a major problem, because if you're writing a proposal as if it was a report, then it's communicatively speaking. There's one of the criteria is communicative achievement. You're not fulfilling the task. So you have to be careful. And I think that students pay too much attention, more than necessary, to language. Like, oh, am I making many spelling mistakes, or do I have grammatical errors or mistakes? And yes, that's fine. I mean, it's, of course you have to keep it in mind, but that's not everything. That's one tiny little part of the hallmark.
Yeah.
I do a lot of task analysis in my classes. For example, I bring material from the official exam books. I get writings done by students, and I sometimes recycle. Of course, I remove the names and everything, but I recycle writings from my previous courses that I've taught, and then I have the students analyze how much do you think this student would get in content, or in communicative achievement, or in organization. And when I use official material, for example, they get surprised, like, this person got 5 in language, or this person got 5 in content. And then I tell them, yes, I mean, it's not really that complicated. I mean, sometimes focusing on tiny little things that they don't really make much of a bulk, of the final mark. Just to give you a very specific example, I had this student who had the tendency, like, and it was a little hard for me, like, to get him out of that habit, like writing a report using, for example, extremely descriptive language, like the amazing project was carried out. And I was like, this is irrelevant. I mean, using that kind of language in a report is irrelevant. I mean, just look at it from a real perspective. Imagine that I am the owner of a company, and I want to know what's going on in one department because it's, I'm not making enough money. And I appoint you to go there and then let me know what's going on. I just want to know what's going on. I don't need to know your opinion about if you think it's amazing or if you think it's incredibly beautiful. No, that's irrelevant to me. So, and that's part of the content, that it says minor irrelevances and things like that. So, getting students to really, understand the marking criteria, and knowing, for example, what they're supposed to be doing. I think that's the best strategy that you can follow. I mean, like, really understanding what is expected of you.
Yeah, that's one of the recommendations I made, similar to what you're saying, is to try to put yourself in the shoes of the examiner. So try and imagine what the examiner is looking for when in the writing or the speaking.
In my classes, I never expect them to come up with a mark. I mean, I never tell a student how much. I tell them, like, how much do you think this person would get? Like an approximation, like, do you think a 3 or a 4 in this particular, criterion? And, they come up with a number. That's fine. They can come up with any number they want. But then when I tell them the real number they got, they get like, wow.
Yeah. So it all makes sense. It's true. I think definitely people focus too much on certain areas and forget about other areas. So that's a very good point too. Yeah. So let's move on to the next question. Okay, this one is also about speaking and writing. So what are those mistakes that are really unacceptable in both speaking and writing in terms of grammar or spelling? So are there any particular mistakes that are just totally unacceptable? More than others, I guess.
Well, spelling in writing, for example, spelling is not much of a problem. Actually, I wouldn't say it's a problem at all, because even at proficiency level, if you look at the marking criteria for proficiency, to get 5 points in the writing, in language, for example, because spelling falls under the category of language. Even at very high levels, slips are acceptable. So having the odd spelling mistake is acceptable. I have them, to be honest. I have to read again what I write, because many times
spelling is very difficult in English, I think.
Exactly. And this is something that exactly, this is something that students don't usually understand, like, or they don't get. Like, spelling is difficult. Even for native speakers, spelling is difficult. And you cannot expect a native speaker to know the spelling of a word just, out of the blue.
Yeah, if they've never seen it before or never learned it before.
Exactly. So spelling is not much of a problem unless it's consistent. Like if it becomes systematic, like it's a repetitive trait or repetitive thing that you notice in the same piece of writing.
Right.
Then yes, then we have a problem. And of course, in that particular area, because even in the language you have one descriptor for grammar, one descriptor for vocabulary, one descriptor for mistakes. So you only have 3 descriptors, I think, in the language criterion. And even for spelling, which is mistakes, it's only one of those set of descriptors. So this is so you can realize that how little spelling counts. Now, in the other parts of the exam, yes, spelling is essential, especially in the listening.
Listening, yeah, that was another question actually. So yeah, you could continue with that, because I think you're asking.
Yes, listening, no spelling mistakes are accepted.
Yeah, we're thinking about
alternative, yes.
Part 2 in particular. I guess, is it part 2 or part 3? I'm not sure.
Part 2, I think.
Yeah, part 2. You have to, because you have to reproduce what is said.
And also in the use of English, for example, if the word formation task, no spelling mistakes. And part 4, the keyword transformation, no spelling mistakes. Right. Actually, alternative spellings are accepted. Like if a word has an alternative spelling, like skeptic, skeptic has two spellings, one with K and the other with C. And words like that. But yes, in speaking, for example, it has to do with probably different pronunciations of the same word. For example, the word controversy, which I say controversy, I don't know how you say it, but
controversy.
Exactly. So you say controversy, and it's commonly found in Britain, for example, to say controversy, even though I've heard other British people say, no, I say controversy.
Yeah.
So you find both pronunciations in the UK, but in the US, you would hear, most definitely, I would say, you would hear controversy.
Yeah.
So I think it's not a problem, but you have to be consistent. Like, again, what we said before. If you say in the beginning of the test, for example, you say controversy, and then you say controversy, then that sounds odd.
Yeah. Like privacy and privacy and many other words.
Exactly. Vitamin and vitamin. Yeah.
Tomato, all those things. But usually students have one way of pronouncing. They don't usually change their pronunciation. I think, as you mentioned before, that's not usually a problem. But yeah, with the spelling, it's perhaps more problematic, because if they're not sure, I think sometimes even students may even think, well, I'll try this spelling in the first paragraph, and as I'm not sure, I'll try a different spelling in the second paragraph.
No, that level, no.
Right.
Yeah.
It should be consistent. Is more.
Yeah, exactly.
Do examiners really count words when it comes down to the writing part? For example, let's say a student writes 270 words, even though they are supposed to write less than that. Would an examiner count them all and be anal about it?
Okay, this is something. If you look again at the marking criteria for writing, there is nothing, absolutely nothing that says if a student wrote this number of words, they would be penalized. There is nothing.
No.
It's the number of words is it's to orientate.
It's a guide, like a guideline.
Orientate. I think orientate is British, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I know, but it's one of those, another example.
Yeah,
of the difference
yeah.
of-
Orientate, orient. Yeah. Well, anyway, it's to guide students
I
to.
think it's the other way. I think orient is English, is British, and orientate is American.
You see, I have no idea.
No, I'm not. It's not important, really.
Yeah, and, yeah, exactly. So guide. I will use the word guide. So basically, to guide students on how to keep it concise as possible, but giving a full answer. But what happens, for example, if you write fewer words than the limit that they put, because they put you between this and this, like they give you like a range of words that you can move around.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter, and honestly, it's a waste of time counting the words, because examiners don't, as far as I know. I want to make that clear. As far as I know, examiners don't count the words. As far as I know, and what happens is, if the answer is too short, then you have to look at what the marking criteria says. What about content? If the student, for example, wrote fewer words, then he or she might have probably forgotten to include something. The reader is not completely informed. Like the criteria says, in the writing, it says, the reader is fully informed or partially informed or something like that. So maybe the person omitted something or forgot to answer something, and that is penalized because you're not following the criteria.
Yeah.
If you write too much, let's say that the limit is 260 words and you wrote 300, it's not a problem as long as you don't say anything which is irrelevant, because it's very common that if you write too much, then you will end up writing something which is okay, that's nice, but it's not really relevant to the task.
Yeah.
Like it's not really connected, and that is penalized. Okay.
Yeah.
So the number of words per se is not penalized. What is penalized is what comes as a consequence of writing too little or too much. And of course, if you mess up with the content, it's like a cascade, because if you mess up with the content, you can mess up with the communicative achievement, and you can also have problems with maybe organization. And the last one, language. But language is not usually affected when you don't cover enough material. Well, maybe yes, because you don't showcase all the range of structures that you're supposed to be covering.
You haven't taken the opportunity to demonstrate your
Exactly. So
domino effect.
It's like a domino effect. One thing, and this is something that I want to let your followers know, is the advantages you have when you take the computer-based exam. Because and I understand when my students tell me, oh no, but because they feel the computer so distant, like I need to feel proximity, holding a pencil and reading on a paper is better for me. I understand that, because I am that kind of reader myself. I prefer to read in paper rather than reading on, off a screen. But taking the computer-based exam has a lot of advantages. First, the listening. You have headphones, and that eliminates all distractions.
Huge advantage,
Yes, it's a great advantage having headphones on. You concentrate on your listening, and you have no distractions. In the reading, for example, I understand that reading off a screen is not usually it's not healthy, but you have all the advantages. I mean, in the screen, you have access to everything. You can select text. You can highlight that text pretty much the same way you do with a PDF reader, for example. You can highlight text. You can add notes to that text.
All right.
You right click and you have a like a sub menu that says add note, and you can write your own notes,
Right.
which can come really handy, for example, for the cross text
Mm.
task in
Yeah.
advanced,
Yeah.
and can also come really handy in the scanning task, which is, at the end, the last one. You
Yeah.
have to do a lot of scanning. You know that.
Backwards and forwards. Yeah.
Exactly. And you know that a segment will only give you a number of answers, like a maximum of 3 answers. So when you have found them and you see that you have already highlighted the answers,
Mm.
that can come in very handy.
Right.
In the writing, you have a word count at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So when you type your answer, which is really nice because you type and you can see how many words you're typing. So
Right.
you have the word count at the bottom, so you don't have to worry about counting
Right. All right. Yeah.
words. And another thing is, which is, it goes back to a question you asked in the beginning. Another problem that I've seen in my exams and the mock exams that I've done in my classes in writing is that students have this horrible tendency to write a rough draft before passing on to clean, and they have time for the first task, but not for the second one. For the second one, they see themselves like hurrying, like trying to get it done before the time finishes.
Uh-huh.
My advice is plan. Take your time to plan something. 6-7 minutes planning will save you loads of time later, especially when you want to write something that looks clean. When I see my students writing something and I see lots of scratches on the paper, that tells me I know for sure that that student did not plan at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when you have all those scratches on the answer
Yeah.
sheet,
Yeah.
it tells me that, oh, this person,
Changing their minds about things
exactly,
and
they didn't plan. They didn't plan at all. And I think planning is essential, and it's something that a lot of people overlook.
yeah.
If you're the kind of person that likes to write a rough draft before passing on to clean, the computer exam will come in really well for you, because you can start organizing your ideas, and then you can copy paste from the same text, and select a whole bunch of text and move it on to the beginning. That's a lot easier to edit your
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic.
And the best part, you get the results
Ah,
2 weeks after.
I was going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very important too. I mean, people get very impatient when they're waiting for the results, and maybe they need them for a particular reason. But yeah, that's the one.
Recently, a student of mine took the exam. He improved a lot, to be honest. In the beginning, when he started with me, I was a little worried that he might not get the level, because he was just borderline. I mean, he would get kind of consistently a little lower, lower than the passing score. And he worked really hard, and in the end, I mean, he took the computer-based exam, and I told him, you got to let me know how you did, and he passed with a really high mark.
All right.
I mean, a really good mark. You passed with 180, I think, and then he passed with an 187.
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah.
So, and you think the computer-based exam, the fact that he took the computer-based exam, contributed to that?
Yeah.
It was made a difference.
Yeah, it made a difference, and for him, he was not very comfortable with the idea of taking a computer-based exam, but he did it.
And it's important to practice, I think, with a computer-based exam before. And on the official website, you can find.
There's one.
Yeah, so that's just to get a feel for managing the screen and everything.
Yes, and also, if, for example, you can get hold of, I think there are some books, common mistakes at CAE and how to avoid them, but making sure you buy the edition that says Test Bank. In the cover that it says Test Bank, it will give you access to 4 full exams.
Right. Okay.
On the official Cambridge website, and you get a scratch code. I mean, at the back of the cover, you scratch the code, you introduce the code, and then you have access to a computer-based. It's the same version you get in the paper books. The official paper books. You have I think Advanced 1 and 2, you have 4 exams per book.
Yeah.
And you have access to only 4 exams from exactly the same exam you get on paper. I think the only exception is the speaking
Okay.
and the writing. I think you can do the writing, but you need to have someone who can check it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And going back to what you said about the planning for the writing, I always recommend 15 minutes to plan. I mean, it depends on the student.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, but yes, I think 15 from 7 to 15 would be more. Yeah, good.
Yeah, people say it's excessive, 15 minutes, but I think, as you said, it's. I think the
No, it will save you time. Basically, you will fill in the blanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I think it's really. But when I say planning, I plan exactly what you're going to say in each part of each paragraph, and think about vocabulary. So then you just have to write it out. It's
Another thing that I got from a student, and this is a tip that I got from a student. You can have like a memorized list of connectors, let's say linkers, for example, and then the very first thing that this student did was in the booklet, she wrote all the linkers that she could remember, like making a short list. And then when she was planning and when she was doing the actual writing, she would look back at the list and then say, oh, I can use this one, I can use that one. And then one because she didn't want to repeat the same linkers, oh, this one I can use this other one that she remembered just because she wrote that list of linkers. And that's something that can help as well.
Yeah, just to clarify, so you don't have to keep trying to remember all the time. You just have to remember once.
So just before you start planning, just before you start writing, you make your own list of linkers, for example, just to work on the linkers. But yeah, that's a really nice idea. I thought it was great.
Yeah. It's just saving yourself time and energy. Just making it as easy as possible for yourself, so you don't have to waste time. With that. Just quickly, a couple more. How important is correct punctuation? Well, yeah. How important is correct punctuation, like commas, full stops, paragraphs, those types?
Punctuation falls under the category of organization. The typical example. I always tell my students, I write a sentence on the board, and that says, "It's time to eat, children," and then I say, "It's time to eat, comma, children. It's time to eat, children, exclamation point."
Right. Okay, it makes a difference.
Yes, exactly. I tell them, what is the difference? Of course, there's a world of difference between the two sentences. So that I tell them, this is how important punctuation is.
Yeah.
Avoiding those run-on sentences, like one sentence is running on top of the other, and things like that. That basically will affect coherence, like the way you link your ideas. I think it's a basic thing, and I do devote time at least in the beginning, when in the first classes, like making sure that punctuation is fine. It's important, but it's not really that important unless it creates some sort of confusion. When you read something, sometimes, in my case, for example, if I'm reading something that a student of mine has written, and I have to read it again because I didn't get it the first time, then we have a problem.
Right.
So when I read something, then I say, wait a second, let me go back. And then my brain is trying to make sense of it.
Yeah.
Then we have a problem. My brain cannot have those problems, for example.
No. And often students just include too many commas, for example. There are commas in random places which can affect the flow and the comprehension.
I remember that I had a student at proficiency level, and he was like asking me, does it make a difference, for example, if I use the serial comma or not, the Oxford comma, the comma before the and, the conjunction? And I was like, no. That level of punctuate, no.
Yeah, even native speakers have arguments and huge debates about the Oxford comma.
Exactly. So. No, I mean, not to that level, but like when you start with an introductory sentence and not putting the comma, I think it's a problem. You know?
Yeah. Or, however. Or...
Exactly. Or, for example, when you use conditionals, sometimes they forget the comma when you begin with a if, for example. they forget the comma, and it's not much of a problem, but it does affect, like the flow of ideas.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, so it's not something to
Mm.
obsess over, but at least pay attention to it and
Mhm.
try to improve it.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Good. I think the last question, this one I'm not sure if you can answer, but it's an interesting question. I've always been wondering why in the exams they still use the old-fashioned way of the CD player for the listening part. The experience in one of my exams was of a muffled sound, so that every candidate had to complain in writing afterwards. I'm enormously intrigued by what their answer will be, but I'm not sure if that's in your realm of expertise.
Um, I cannot give a definite answer, but I think I have a very good answer that makes sense, because that's what my experience, having this proximity. I think it is because of the being physical, because physical material can get easily destroyed. I think it has to do with the fact that when you have files, like for example, an MP3 files, you can have all the security in the world, and you can only have like the certain people have access to those files, but they can leak. And I any examination body will take the security measures to avoid these things from happening, like getting official material leaked, and that you can have access to exams or questions. And I know I've heard, for example, that the IELTS exam, the other, yes, exactly. I've heard that some questions have leaked, or that the listenings have leaked, and I think keeping things in physical format, like having a CD, that would get easily destroyed later, like it's broken into pieces. I think that they do it because of that. Because of course, if you have access, I mean, internet can be faulty sometimes. I mean, you can have problems with access to the internet, and accessing the files, for example, can be problematic. So having a CD would work just fine. Of course, I mean, you can also have problems with a CD.
Yeah, but you can
But
prepare. Yeah, it's safer and more secure,
yeah,
and also it can't be hacked. I mean, that's
yeah, I think that's the thing. You can copy protect a CD, for example. You can have like a protection, so you don't copy it. And I think they do it because of that, which is another reason why you should take the computer-based exam. I mean, like, you have the headphones, and of course, depending on the center, on the exam center, they have these loudspeakers, and sometimes, depending on where you're sitting, you can listen to the get a better acoustics or whatever. I think it depends on the exam center as well. The quality of the material, the equipment,
Yeah, especially I think but during the pandemic, I think you have to have the windows and doors open, so you get more
Oh yes, yes,
background noise. So
yes.
it can be more problematic. So definitely the computer-based is the best way to go.
I think it's the best way. Yeah, exactly. So I would, and of course, just to remind people, the computer-based is still taken at the exam center. You
Right.
don't,
Yes.
you
Yes.
don't take it
Yes.
from home.
That's true. Yes. Many people think it's an internet or online exam. It's not
It
online.
is. It is. I mean, it is because you access through a special browser that locks the computer.
Right.
I mean, the browser, it's not the typical Firefox, or it's just a special browser that it's used for proctoring purposes.
Right.
And then that browser locks the computer, so you don't have access to other websites, or even the start menu or anything. I mean, it locks the whole computer. You only have access to that window, and that's it.
But you can't do it from Starbucks
No,
or from
no.
your house. So
Yeah,
you have to be in the center. Yeah, exactly.
exactly.
That's a common misconception about that. So it's worth mentioning. Yeah. Just a very quick one more question from my question, because when I do practice exams with my students, I play the role of the examiner. as best I can. And I'm often not sure when students are speaking and it's a timed task, when I need to interrupt them. If I have to sort of be quite strict, like after 1 minute or 2 minutes, whatever the task is, how much leeway can you give to the students?
Well, at least I think it's out of courtesy and just let them finish a sentence. I mean, in my case, I would never stop a student. For example, if I'm doing a mock speaking, for example, I would never stop a student mid sentence, unless I know that, or I have the impression that the sentence will be longer.
Yeah.
But something that you have to remind your students is that the thank you, when examiners say thank you, it's because the time is finished and we have enough, examiners have enough information to move on to the next part.
Okay.
It's nothing against the student, because I feel that sometimes students might take it as I did something wrong. So
yeah. I think it's important that the students get used to being interrupted. I hate interrupting because it goes against all my instincts as an English teacher. I want my students to speak as much as possible.
No. I mean, I tell my students in class, for example, like, speak until you hear thank you.
Yeah. And
when you hear the thank you, just stop, and then that's it.
That's it. No problem. Yeah.
No problem.
As long as you have answered the question.
Exactly.
I mean, if you've answered the question, it's all good. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's about it. That's fantastic, Frank. I should, remind people that you have a fantastic podcast. It's What You Say in English, and I'll put the link in the description of the video because it's really useful, as this interview has been. It's been such valuable insights that you've given us, for me personally, and I'm sure for all the people watching. So I can't thank you enough, and hopefully maybe we can do it again, because probably I'm going to get bombarded with questions now from people now I have contact with an examiner. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.